Greens, question orale, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this government always claims to stand with our longtime ally, Israel, until it matters. Once again, the Liberals voted against Israel at the United Nations. When asked to explain their vote, the Deputy Prime Minister compared Israel to authoritarian regimes. Will the Prime Minister demand an apology for the Deputy Prime Minister's insult of an ally of Canada?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is a strong ally and close friend of Israel. We're committed to the goal of a lasting peace in the Middle East, including the creation of a Palestinian state peacefully side by side with Israel. We are consistent with the Canadian position long held by governments of all political stripes. Canada's vote was a reflection of our long-standing commitment to the right of self-determination for both the Palestinian people and for Israelis.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is consistent in disappointing our allies. They voted against Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East. Even Michael Levitt, who was a Liberal MP just weeks ago, criticized the vote and said that it demonizes Israel. Maybe that's why he left this chamber, Mr. Speaker. Now Mr. Levitt's former colleagues are comparing Israel to an authoritarian regime. Will the Prime Minister take this opportunity to publicly disavow the comments from the Deputy Prime Minister?
A right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as a government, we have consistently stood up in support of Israel, in defense of our friend and ally, and will continue to. We have stood up consistently against the illegitimate singling out of Israel through one-sided votes at the United Nations. We've continued to do that, but we also recognize the right of Palestinian self-determination, which is something we recognized in that recent vote, while at the same time opposing the broad efforts to single out and delegitimize Israel.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister told the House that Canadians would be the first in line to receive the vaccine. Today, he admitted we're going to be behind many countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany. Reuters is even reporting that Mexico will receive a vaccine before Canadians. How many more months will it take to flatten the curve because this Prime Minister has been unable to rapidly secure a vaccine?
Right honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition might not have been following this too closely, but Canada is actually being lauded as one of the countries that has achieved the best and largest portfolio of vaccines, of potential vaccines for its citizens, because we know that we are not certain yet which vaccines from which companies are going to be most effective, are going to arrive first. So Canada stepped up and has secured millions of doses of vaccines for Canadians that will be arriving in the coming months. We're going to continue to ensure that Canadians get the protection they need so we can get through this pandemic together.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, for weeks, Conservatives have been sounding the alarm that this government has put us at the end of the line for vaccines. Today, the Prime Minister admitted that Canada is behind the US, the UK, Germany, and others. How much longer will Canadians have to wait? Because this government has put us at the end of the lineup. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, since the very beginning, we've been negotiating and signing contracts with a record number of companies that produce vaccines because we knew that we had to make sure Canadians would have access to millions of vaccine doses. When you don't know exactly which company is going to produce which vaccine and how quickly and in the most effective way. So we secured one of the best vaccine portfolios in the world. And as I said, we will be able to deliver vaccines to Canadians in early 2021. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Speaker, on September 30th, the Prime Minister promised here in the House that Canada would be the first country to get a vaccine. 2 months later, he admits that he was wrong. we do not have priority access to vaccines. We're still at the end of the line. Americans will get a vaccine in a few weeks. When will Canadians get theirs? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I fully understand why Canadians want to know when vaccines will arrive, because we're all anxious to get through this pandemic. That's why it's so important to keep distancing. That's why the federal government is working with the provinces so that they can impose restrictions that will help flatten the curve. And that is why Canada has secured access to more vaccines than any other country on a per capita basis, because we've shown that we are able to manage this crisis to help Canadians. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, none of the Prime Minister's answers to my esteemed colleagues were even remotely legit. Canadians and Quebecers won't get vaccines as early as most other Western democracies. Period. That's a fact. The health of thousands of people is at stake. We will have to wait extra weeks, and the Prime Minister has been coming up with excuses for what is inexcusable. Will the Prime Minister correct his mistake and enter into negotiations to get vaccines for Canadians and Quebecers at the same time as Americans, Germans, and the British? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the very beginning, we knew that there were challenges because unlike the Germans and the Americans and the British, we don't have a mass production capacity for vaccines. So we had to come up with broader sources than those countries. And that's precisely what we did. And we were even criticized internationally because we got too much access to vaccines. We have the best access, better than so many countries. We did our homework to make sure that Canadians would get vaccines quickly and surely. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, we don't have too much. We're talking about when will we get it. The problem is when. The Prime Minister, basically by what he hasn't said and by his hesitation, has basically confirmed that Canadians and Quebecers will have to wait and remain sick, if not worse. You have to ask why Canada's pharmaceutical industry was not in the race. Maybe they're asking themselves that question. Who negotiated these bad deals? And are they the same people who are now lecturing everyone else, including the provinces? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we're not here to lecture the provinces. We're here to work with them. And that's why we delivered a record number of personal protective equipment and testing kits. That's why we've transferred $25 billion to the provinces to help get kids back in school and to have a safe restart. We are working hand in glove with the provinces and businesses to help Canadians as we get through this process. We have the right approach. We've made the promise. We will always be there for Canadians. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of COVID cases is going up. People are afraid for their families, for their own health. The U.S. and England have announced a plan to deliver vaccine as early as next week. Why is the Prime Minister forcing Canadians to wait? What's the game plan here in Canada? When will we have a vaccine in Canada? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I said, we have secured access to a record number of vaccines all across the world. We have the best vaccine portfolio in the world, and we have secured hundreds of millions of doses. We know that we have to do everything we must to flatten the curve reduce the number of cases to protect Canadians, and that's why we're also working to make sure the provinces have rapid testing kits and PPE. That's why we have supports for individuals and businesses all across the country.
Mr. Speaker, COVID-19 cases are on the rise. People across the country are afraid. Communities are afraid. Communities like Nunavut, where under-resourcing puts people at an extreme risk. The United States and England have announced plans to roll out vaccines as early as next week. But what's the plan in Canada? Can the Prime Minister let Canadians know what the plan is? When will Canada receive the vaccine?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as the member opposite well knows, Canada has successfully signed contracts to have the best portfolio of potential vaccines of any of our peer countries around the world. We've done this to ensure that Canadians have access to a vaccine regardless of which vaccine companies land first, which vaccine companies have the best vaccine. We needed to make sure that Canadians would have access to these vaccines, and that's exactly what we've done. We're working with partners, including in the provinces and territories, to ensure that vaccine distribution will be rapid and seamless. And as I've said a number of times before, the vaccine will be entirely free.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Mr. Speaker, last week the House of Commons passed our Conservative motion asking the government for a robust plan to, amongst other things, combat Communist China's growing foreign operations here in Canada and its increasing intimidation of Canadians. The Liberals are clearly scared and intimidated by the CCP, and they voted against it. Yesterday, when we asked the Foreign Affairs Minister to say if he will respect the democratic will of Parliament, he gave no answer. So I'm going to ask the Prime Minister, will he show some intestinal fortitude and after 5 years present a plan to deal with the threat of the Chinese Communist Party?
The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the important question. I think when it comes to foreign policy, Mr. Speaker, there should be much in terms of political debate. What I've answered yesterday, more than 2 hours of questions, more than any minister I've ever answered questions on China, Mr. Speaker. Our policy is very simple. It's to be firm and smart. That's what we've said. That's what we've done, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to the release of Michael Koving and Spavor and obtaining consular access for them. That's what we did, firm and smart, when it came to Hong Kong, Mr. Speaker, standing up for the freedoms and liberties of the people of Hong Kong. And I would say if you speak to them, the leader of opposition, you would see that Canada was at the forefront of defending the freedoms of liberty with the people of Hong Kong.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, speaking of yesterday, to add insult to injury, the Foreign Affairs Minister said that Canadians who feel intimidated or threatened by bad CCP actors should simply call their local police. Mr. Speaker, call their local police. Now, at the very same time, right now, there are 19 public servants working to help Bill Morneau get his OECD soft landing seat. But the Liberals refuse to put any effort, resources, or political capital into protecting Canadians who are threatened by the CCP. Why is this Prime Minister so afraid to stand up to the communist government in China?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, again, I would think that the member, you should just look at the international community, Mr. Speaker, and you see Canada as being at the forefront of the response when it came to the Uyghur, when it comes to Hong Kong, when it comes to standing up, being firm and smart. That's what Canadians at home want us, Mr. Speaker, to do. And when she asked with respect to Canadians leading or wanting to lead international organization, Mr. Speaker, we should all be proud that Canadians are putting themselves forward to lead international organization. We're doing everything in accordance with Treasury Board's guideline and in accordance with precedents that have been set by this government when they want Canadians to sit on the boards of international organizations.
Hear, hear. Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, we can see exactly where these Liberals' priorities are, and it's to help their friends get soft landings. When over 300,000 Canadians in Hong Kong were threatened by the Chinese ambassador, the Prime Minister said and did nothing. And yesterday, the Foreign Affairs Minister suggested to these Canadians at home and abroad, listen to yourself, call your local police. Not only is this outrageous, it's cowardly. Instead of assigning 19 bureaucrats to work on Bill Morneau's OECD seat, will the Prime Minister get his priorities straight and take real action to protect Canadians at home and abroad from Communist China?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me set the record straight for Canadians who are watching at home. Canada was the first country in the world to suspend extradition treaty, Mr. Speaker, with Hong Kong. That is leadership. That is Canada. That's being firm and smart, Mr. Speaker. That's what Canadians watching at home want from this government and from all parliamentarians when it comes to foreign policy, Mr. Speaker. We have no lessons to take from the Conservative. We will be firm. We will be smart. That's what Canadians expect from us.
The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, based on the Prime Minister's response to the Leader of the Opposition, I just want to clarify that Mexicans will be getting the COVID vaccine before Canadians.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, Canada has robust experience in delivering vaccination and the distinct advantage of a public health care system that builds on strong provinces and territories' expertise and relationships. We've procured a diverse portfolio of vaccines, as the member opposite knows, more per capita than any other country. Canada is well positioned to successfully vaccinate Canadians against COVID-19.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
So what the minister is saying is that Mexicans will get vaccinated before Canadians.
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite. Mr. Speaker, the member opposite is putting words in my mouth. In fact, what I'm saying is that Canada is a world leader in vaccination. In fact, have delivered massive vaccination campaigns before, and building on that expertise and leadership, Mr. Speaker, working with provinces and territories, we are very confident that we will be able to deliver COVID-19 vaccines to Canadians. In fact, we have the most diverse portfolio of the world. In fact, we have options for more per capita than any other country in the world.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
So Reuters reported today that Mexicans will be vaccinated in December. The Prime Minister can't give a date for when Canadians will be vaccinated. So if she won't answer that question, what about this? The Procurement Minister says that Mexicans will be vaccinated before Canadians because the Health Minister can't get her department together on approvals. But then the Prime Minister is saying that it's actually the Procurement Minister because she didn't negotiate contracts that allowed for domestic manufacturing capacity. So what's the reason why Mexicans will be vaccinated before Canadians?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, all of government is working together hand in glove right now to ensure that we have access to vaccines for Canada, and in fact our work has proven to be very fruitful. We have options on 7 promising candidates, Mr. Speaker, 3 of which are in regulatory review already as we speak, and those 3 showing tremendous promise in their opportunity to protect people against COVID-19. We're working with provinces and territories, Mr. Speaker, on a deployment plan building on the expertise that Canada already has in vaccinating massive amounts of Canadians every single year. Thank you, Mr.